Well, the Nobel Peace Prize has gone to Venezuelan opposition figure Maria Corina Machado. Sorry, Donnie, you missed out. And it was awarded for Maria's promotion of democracy in her homeland. Now, call me old-fashioned, but I always assumed that a peace prize was handed out to people who promoted peace. Then it occurred to me, old Maria is promoting peace. She's going to promote a piece of Venezuela's economy, a piece of Venezuela's oil reserves, and a piece of Venezuela's gold to America, in return for taking just a little piece of profit off the top. Ah yes, nothing says peace like handing over your country's resources to another foreign entity. I'm Bintang Bernie, and this is Friday News Review. So, welcome to the program for Friday the 17th of October. My, how the year flies by. So, peace, that's what we're talking about. Now, let's just have a look at who Maria Machado is, okay, or what her achievements are. Now, you would have heard the much publicised letter that she wrote to Benjamin Netanyahu begging him to invade her country. So here is a person begging Israel, a nation noted for its moralistic army. Oh, we'll come back to those bastards in the IDF in a moment, don't you worry. So she's begging these people to come in, invade her country, which would result in the deaths and injuries of thousands of people. Well, that's something you give somebody a peace prize to, isn't it? I mean, in any other country, she'd be a traitor and should be locked up. She's also accepted millions in cash from US aid. You see, as is happening in Georgia at the moment, the American aid organizations like USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy, that's another one, they have these wonderful euphemistic titles sort of saying that we're just here to promote democracy and help people. In actual fact, they're regime change agents, and that's all they do, is they try to undermine governments that the Americans don't like and change the leadership. I mean, let's be honest, if these agencies were so actually, if they were so moralistic and so concerned with democracy and aid, well, why aren't they in places like Palestine? Why isn't, Myanmar, why aren't they getting millions and billions of dollars? Yet it's places like Venezuela and Ukraine and Georgia that seem to get all this aid. Countries which are far better off than most countries in the world. So that it stands to reason that these agencies aren't really interested in aid. They're interested in working as an arm of the American government. Another thing Maria has done, she colluded with the Biden government and the CIA to create mass voter fraud in Venezuela. She also led huge protests against the government in which several people were killed. All right, this is a violent woman. She got caught, this was a good one, she got exposed being part of a plot to try and blow up the US embassy in Venezuela, or put a bomb off at the embassy as a false flag to allow America to attack. And this is the woman who got the Nobel Peace Prize. And at first I was aghast by that. I thought, how could this woman, who is clearly violent, clearly a traitor to her own country, who would be locked up, imprisoned in any other country, why is she getting the Nobel Peace Prize? But then I thought, well, who does actually get the Nobel Peace Prize? Let's just have a little think at some of their finer recipients. I mean, she's in the same league as Henry Kissinger. Remember old Henry? Yeah, we're always touted the smartest man in the world. Well, he was pretty smart because he managed to fucking con everyone, didn't he? This is the guy who orchestrated the 1973 coup in Chile, which overthrew the democratically elected leader, sorry, I'm tongue-tied, Allende. Now, why did we overthrow Allende? Because Allende was a socialist. And remember, the one overriding principle about this great system called democracy, which we enforce around the world, is you are free to choose whomever you want, so long as it's the person we tell you to choose. So the stupid Chileans went and elected a socialist leader. So Kissinger organised a coup, overthrew him, replaced him with General Pinochet. You don't have to be much of a history buff to know that Pinochet was a fascist bastard who ruthlessly seized power. Thousands of opposition figures were disposed, taken away, killed. It's still a stain in Chile, the people who have disappeared and never been found. Okay, that was the work of Kissinger. What else did old Henry do? Okay, apart from his involvement in the Vietnam War, another one of America's great success stories of bringing democracy to Vietnam. The day, and it's interesting, just on TV, I'm in Indonesia at the moment, the home of Bintang. And just on the TV the other day, I noticed I was watching ABC TV from Australia, and it's the 50th anniversary of the Balibo Five, where the 5 Australian journalists were caught in the crossfire by the Indonesians. Oh, that's right, sorry, they weren't actually caught in the crossfire. That's what we were told for the last 45 years, when our government knew that no, they were executed by Indonesian soldiers. What's interesting, and why I bring that up in relation to the Nobel Peace Prize and our good old mate Henry Kissinger, is the night before the Indonesians invaded West Timor, President Suharto met with Henry Kissinger to get the green light. And it's also fair to say that our government, one of the shameful things, one of the many shameful things that my government has done, was they were aware of it. And once again, the reason was that the poor old East Timorese were doing the stupid thing again. They were using their God-given right to elect a socialist leader. They were going to actually have potentially a socialist communist government, and it was going to open a foothold for the Soviet Union right in the middle of the Pacific. And no, we couldn't have that, regardless of what the East Timorese people wanted. So we greenlit the Indonesian invasion of East Timor, which the current president is involved in, and that needs investigation. And of course, we now know that there were horrific atrocities, and our government lied to us about the Balibo Five journalists, because if they'd said at the time that the Indonesian army had executed Australian journalists, there would have been outrage in Australia and potentially war. Remember, at that stage, I worked for the Navy in '84. I remember in the '80s, Indonesia and Australia were on very rocky ground. I'm very pleased to say we're best of friends now, and that's how it should be. But in those days, there was an extreme chance of conflict. I remember one of the naval captains taking me into a room and showing me the arcs for the flight radius, the combat radius of the F-111. The F-111 fighter plane was bought by the Australian government specifically because it could bomb Jakarta. That is a fact, okay? We don't talk about it much now, and like I said, I'm glad there's no tension between our countries and we're all good friends, but in the 70s and 80s, we had bought an aircraft specifically to say to the Indonesians, if you give us any grief, there'll be bombs dropping on Jakarta. That's why Australia bought the F-111 aircraft. Now, coming back anyway, so Henry Kissinger, basically responsible for the massacres and the ongoing oppression of decades in East Timor. As an aside, one thing the Australian government didn't tell you at the time, that we always talk about the Balibo Five, and it was mentioned on TV today. Who remembers Roger East? I bet none of you know who the guy is. Roger East was an Australian independent journalist who went into East Timor to cover the Indonesian invasion. Okay, because like all invasions, we all knew it was coming. People were there to see what was happening. Roger East, along with a huge amount of the East Timorese population, was lined up on a cliff top by the Indonesian military and shot in the back of the head, and their bodies fell into the sea. But of course, we didn't talk much about Roger East because it was pretty hard at the time to spin the lie that old Roger had been caught up in the crossfire when he'd been executed in that way. So it was part of a cover-up by the Australian government to try and pretend that the Indonesian military weren't committing the types of atrocities which they were. So, moving on, and I do want to dedicate this program to Roger East because I think that man has been overlooked by history, and it was horrible what happened to him and to the Timorese people. Anyway, back to the Nobel Peace Prize. We're talking about peace, which always brings us to war and atrocities, doesn't it? Because the two are so intertwined. So who else got the Nobel Peace Prize? Well, of course, we've had our mate Obama. Now, you've heard me mention this guy on my show before. The smiling, hip, cool black guy that's just so chill. Here, little girl, I'll write you a note. You don't have to go to school. Oh, yeah, continue with that drone bomb. Wedding party? Ah, too bad. Women and children? That's life. Yes, that's right. Barack Obama, a man who authorised a drone bomb campaign from his weekly meeting. I think it was a Tuesday or a Wednesday. It was every Tuesday. They used to meet. And Obama would select the drone bomb targets. And these are the places where the US government would just go and drop bombs on people. One of which we know for a fact was a wedding party with women and children in attendance. That was drone bombed, you know. That's the kind of guy. He got the Nobel Peace Prize. Not once. He got it twice because he killed lots of people. You know, it is disgusting. And then we have someone like Trump touting, when I mention his name, God almighty. This guy going on that he should get it. I mean, the arrogance, the self-centeredness. I mean, he has the emotional and mental stability of a 4-year-old Donald Trump, you know. But regardless of that, you know, you've got people, you know, promoting, other government leaders promoting that he should get a peace prize. What the fuck for? Okay, let's now go to the Middle East. Is there peace in the Middle East? No. There's a pause, a breath, if you like, a shuffle. Okay? There's no lasting peace there. The stop, the pause, is the fact that America has temporarily, with Israel, put the brakes on a war that America funded and supplied all the munitions for. Donald Trump provided bombs to Israel knowing they were going to be used to bomb civilians. How the fuck does that qualify you to even be in the running for a peace prize? In my mind, that qualifies you to be in the running to go to fucking prison. That's how bizarre and how ironic all of this is. And that's why it fucks with my head, honestly, ladies and gentlemen. I look around at the world and I do not understand it because it doesn't make any sense to somebody like me. Now, going on with Donnie's 20-point peace plan, and I said to you last week, it's not a peace plan. It's not a plan. It's not when somebody says to you, you will do this or we will rain down hell on you like you have never experienced before. Ladies and gentlemen, that's an ultimatum, nothing short. You will obey or we will destroy you. And recently, Trump has come out. Now, this is the thing. How do we in the West hold ourselves up? No wonder the Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, no wonder they all point their finger at us and laugh and say, you bunch of fucking hypocrites. Do you know what Donald Trump came out and said? He said the Palestinians have to accept the peace plan, otherwise we'll just have to kill them all. Mate, I don't think Adolf Hitler was even as direct as that. What a disgusting, despicable, inhumane thing for anybody to say, let alone a president in a supposedly elected democracy talking about freedoms and human rights. In the same week, we had this absolute fuckwit, Richard Marles, talking about his agreements and peace treaties and that he's made in the local area, saying that he's done them and why we need to keep close to America. And his mate Pete Hegseth is to promote the stability in the Indo-Pacific and the rest of the world of the rules-based order. As I've always said, show me these fucking rules, because I'd like to see, what is it, number 28? It's okay to commit genocide on a population if a religious fundamental bunch of fanatics think so. You know, I mean, the hypocrisy is gone beyond farcical and Orwellian. It's now gone to a stage where it absolutely disgusts me. And I'm quite ashamed to be part of the free West. And you'll get the usual ones. Oh, if you don't like it, leave. If you don't like it, go. No, I don't want to fucking go anywhere. I just want my government to stop supporting genocide, to stop lying to me, to stop this double standard, and to show some fucking ticker for once and stand up and call out what is wrong as what is wrong. Stop pretending. So, yeah, so old Donnie in the running for a peace prize. I mean, you may as well give it to Donald Trump, you know, why not? He's the guy. How many wars has he avoided? He's, you know, he's so far he's stopped 8 out of 7 wars. He's a legend in his own mind, old Donny. Now remember, this is a guy who came to power, elected on a basis by the American people. As an aside, I just happened to come across one of those American police video shows on YouTube. Man, that country is so fucked up, it is not funny. It is run by cowboys. It's a dangerous, dangerous place. I think the police are more of a threat to the civil society than anyone else. However, America, this is a nation which holds itself up as a bastion of democracy, and yet all it does is undermine democracy around the world. We know of regime change. We know of the illegal wars. As I've always said, I thought when the war in Iraq came out that it was all predicated on a complete fabricated lie. I thought, finally, I was like my namesake, Winston Smith, in 1984, when he hears the bomb drop on the proletariat and he hears the low moaning and he thinks, finally, the proles have woken up, they've arisen from their slumber, they've realised what's going on. That's how I felt about the 1990 Gulf War, when we knew it was a lie. When it came out, it was clearly a lie. And you know what? Sadly, just like Winston Smith, the proletariat did nothing. The proles have the power, but the proles are powerless. So it goes on, and we have more lies and more wars. This week, we've had the great debate about Tomahawk missiles going to Ukraine. Now, as I was saying, coming back to Donald Trump, this is a guy who was elected on a platform of no more wars. Stop the endless wars. America's endless wars. They've got to stop. Bring all the troops home. Well, what wars has he actually stopped? Okay? The Middle East hasn't stopped. It hasn't been resolved. It won't be resolved until the Palestinians have their own state. And as I said last week, that will never happen. Israel will just not allow it. Okay? So you've got a bunch of fundamentalist religious fanatics who are controlling that whole area and are now gearing up for a war in Iran. Mark my words, that's only weeks, months away. Okay, they're gearing up for the next phase, which is the war in Iran, and I spoke about that last week and how dangerous I think that is, because Israel is even more dangerous as a defeated country than as a victorious one. So Donnie is supposed to stop all these wars. Now this week we've been talking about sending Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. Once again, I don't know where this comes from, because any rational, sane military objective, viewpoint on this would be, well, this is crazy. The Tomahawk missile, as I said before, has a range of about 2,500 kilometres. The missile itself and its range aren't the key issues here. What the key issues are, or the key issue is that it requires Americans to fire at that distance and target it. Now, we all know America has been involved in the war in Ukraine up to their eyeballs. The ones who are really dangerous, of course, which the Russians came out and stated, and they've said this many times, are the British. MI6 and the SAS have been in Ukraine for years, and we know that. We know that the attack on the Kerch Bridge, which left a young 14-year-old girl an orphan because her 2 civilian parents were killed, that was organised by MI6. The attack on the Russian strategic air bases, exceedingly dangerous brinksmanship. Okay, you don't fuck with a country's nuclear deterrent. Okay, that had MI6's fingerprints all over it. And if you listen to people like, I suggest you listen to some people like Colonel Douglas Macgregor, people who are ex-military. He was a advisor to the Pentagon in Trump's first term. So these are people who are experienced. I hate using the term combat veteran, because it kind of sounds somehow that you're making it out that they're great. There's nothing really great about having been in a war, but it does mean that they have knowledge. And if you listen to people like that, and they talk about or Ted Postol's another one, people who actually know how weaponry works, and they tell you that these drone attacks, which Ukraine is doing on Russia repeatedly, what's that, Bintang? Ukraine is repeatedly drone attacking Russia? I didn't know that. No, you wouldn't, because all you hear about is Russian drone attacks on Ukraine. You never hear about the Ukrainian drone attacks which have hit Moscow, where they tried to take out Putin's helicopter and kill the president. Sorry to keep going off on tangents. This imbecile Zelensky Why people are so stupid. They're so easy to make someone a celebrity, a rock star, and then you start following him like he's some kind of hero. The guy is a dangerous little shit. He's a puppet of the West, and he is dangerous not just to Ukraine, which he's destroyed and will continue to destroy. He's dangerous to the whole world. Can you imagine the reaction? Swap it around. Imagine if the Mexican drug cartel fired a missile, took out Air Force One, and killed Donald Trump. What the fuck do you think the response from America would be? Okay? Mexico would be a sheet of glass. Okay? There would be troops in there. Now, this clown Zelensky came close to knocking out Putin's helicopter when he was travelling to the front line. Fired 500 drones at it. It was only the fact that Russian anti-drone defences are so good. Oh, yes, Mark Rutte, you fucking dog Rutte, the paper tiger Russia that's no good. It seems that their defences are pretty good. That would have caused a catastrophic chain reaction throughout Europe had Zelensky's drones killed Putin. The Russian response would have been overwhelming. They would have devastated Ukraine. Anyone who thinks that Russia is in a full-scale war, I mean, I see on even the Australian ABC all the time, they talk about Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Really? I mean, the other day, what I call the 3D blonde joke, Kaja Kallas arrived in Kiev to talk to Zelensky. She arrived by train. Do you think in a total war that Kiev would have trains coming in and out of it? You know, passenger trains? Do you think there'd be, you know, the areas in Kiev you see on TV, flower gardens and parks and people walking around? Kiev would be a smoking pile of ash, okay? All right? So this is how dangerous Zelensky is. But anyway, long story short, I've digressed again, sorry, apologies. The Tomahawk missile going to Ukraine is a very bad move for a couple of reasons. One, it has to be operated by American personnel, and the Russians have come out very clearly and said, if these guys start operating and firing Tomahawks at us, it's a new phase in the war. There will be a specific response. It won't be good. And also, you can kiss US-Russia relations goodbye. The Russians will have nothing to do with America, okay? Dangerous. The other thing is that these things, the land-based version of the Tomahawk, which we all assume is what they're talking about, because Ukraine obviously can't fire them from ships and planes, because they can only be fired from American ships and planes. The land-based version carries a 3,000-pound odd warhead. I think it's 3,300 pounds. That's a massive warhead. One of those smashes into the Kremlin, the Russians aren't going to take too kindly to it, okay? Now, people might say, oh, well, the Russians are attacking Ukraine. Yeah, Russia and Ukraine are at war. We don't want America and Russia to be at war. That's the bigger picture, you know, that the small minds can't perceive because they don't understand how all this works. If Tomahawk missiles start crashing into Russia, then Russia and America are going to end up in direct conflict. And that's something that even the Americans don't really want, okay? Danger, okay? Plus the fact that the reports coming out, the Financial Times released a report recently, there's only 20 to 50 of these things available. Russian air defences will most likely knock most of them, if not all of them, down. The Russian air defences have had 2 years of really good practice on defending their country against missiles and drones. So that's the situation with the Tomahawk. Zelensky is in Washington today. I mean, that guy just spends his life touring the world asking for money, asking for stuff. As I've said before, I've never seen a war where somebody is at war and said, well, yeah, we're at war. We want you guys to pay for everything. You provide everything. It's unbelievable. It's, you know, I say Ukraine is not a country. It's just a big charity in the middle of Europe. Now, unfortunately, Putin and Trump are going to meet in Viktor Orban's hometown in Hungary and have another discussion, try to resolve things. The simple way to resolve this, and once again, the lies that you will have been told non-stop, is that the Russians don't want the war to end. The Russians are the stumbling block. A total, utter, fabricated lie. The Russians, from day one, have said we are open to peace talks, we are open to discussing a peace settlement, provided the situation on the ground is taken into account. In other words, they're not going to have lost 120,000 odd soldiers and then give all that territory back up again. They've said we're here, and they've said we're staying. And as I've pointed out before, they've had referenda in all of these 4 oblasts which overwhelmingly came back people wanting to unify with Russia. So those territories, under international law now and under a wonderful democratic rules-based order, those territories now are actually all Russian. So technically at the moment, Ukrainian armed forces have invaded Russian territory and are fighting in Russian territory. And the Russians are trying to push them out of their territory. That's the legal standpoint, whether you like it or not. So the way to solve this is for basically someone to get rid of this puppet Zelensky, who is nothing more than a coke-addled actor who is still acting at being a president. Get rid of that clown. Put someone in charge with some nous, some internal fortitude, who's not afraid of Boris Johnson or anyone else who comes to tell him what to do, and accept that those areas are lost. Okay, Zelensky lost those in 2022. Those areas, the oblasts in the Donbass, they were lost by Zelensky in 2022 when he had the option to keep them and negotiate a peace treaty. But he didn't, because the walking toilet brush, Boris Johnson, told him not to. Now, and of course, Boris Johnson's been recently in Ukraine with his offsider, whose name, I've got it written down somewhere, I won't waste time looking it up, the shady businessman who runs the defence contracting company, who works as an advisor to Johnson, where all these billions of dollars, or in Britain's case, pounds, are being poured into his defence company to provide weapons for a war which he keeps telling his mate, Boris Johnson, to ensure keeps going in Ukraine. You know, can anyone not follow the money trail yet? This is nothing to do with freedom and democracy. It's about the almighty dollar. So if we had a sensible leadership in Ukraine, they could negotiate with the Russians, and the Russian position has been unchanged, as I've said, since day one. They've never changed it. They've just said no NATO in Ukraine, limit the size of its army because it's being trained against us, which we now know as a fact. Angela Merkel and Francois Hollande admitted that they used the Minsk 1 and 2 agreements, which Putin negotiated in good faith, as covers to train a Ukraine army to NATO standards so it could attack Russia. Any wonder why the Russians are now very wary about a large Ukrainian army? So they want a limit on Ukraine's army. Once again, if you look at it from their standpoint, very reasonable, okay, very logical. And of course the denazification. I mean, look at what's come out lately. The 3rd Battalion, which is basically the Azov neo-Nazi unit, renamed, okay, so that we can separate it so it doesn't come up, you know. Remember John Pilger's documentary on the Azov Battalion? Yeah, the opening words. The first thing you notice when you go in the headquarters of the Azov Battalion are all the swastikas are on the wall. Well, they're now renamed as the 3rd Battalion, and they've basically just been caught by the Ukrainians themselves. That's how bad they are, because they were kidnapping people, torturing them, and ransoning them for money, and demanding money off them, degrading them, doing all sorts of horrible things. These are the people that we're funding. These are the stalwarts of democracy, the people that we're behind against the evil Russians. Please, people, think, reset yourself. I would urge you, and I've said this many times before, to look at alternate media. There's some great alternate media around where you will learn what's going on. If you watch the BBC and CNN and read the Daily Telegraph, you are never going to learn anything. All of these mainstream medias, including things like The Independent and The Guardian, The Guardian, sorry, not The Garden. It should be in The Garden. They're just propaganda machines. They just churn out the same stuff over and over again. Some of them, like The Independent and The Guardian, might do the odd decent piece, but basically it's a rehash of the same old stuff. You're being programmed, you're not being informed. There's a difference. So I'd urge you to look at things. In Australia, we have things like the Kangaroo Court of Australia, some great articles there. Michael West Media, brilliant stuff, great investigative journalism, exposing the shams in our government, hypocrisy, and that appalling disgrace known as AUKUS. You've got people like Robert Parry's The Grey Zone, may he rest in peace. They do some really good stuff. As I said, watch things like Daniel Davis' Deep Dive, McGregor. I watched Colonel McGregor on, what's that lady's name? Rachel Blevins. She does some good podcast independent journalism. There's some really good stuff by people like Aaron Mattei, Max Blumenthal. There are, and obviously another great one, Scott Ritter. There's some great independent news sources that you can get stuff from, and you don't have to swallow it whole. I'm not saying I swallow it whole. People like Tucker Carlson's made some really good stuff, but he's a bit of a right-wing gun nut. It doesn't mean I think everything he said comes out of his mouth is great. There are a whole lot of stuff that Tucker Carlson and I would vehemently disagree with. Same with Douglas McGregor. He's very anti-immigration and immigrants cause all the problems. Pick and choose, but at least pick and choose from people who are telling you the truth, not people who are lying to you. Anyway, look, I've waffled on long enough, probably far too long, and bored the arse off most of you. Once again, thanks for watching. Please, please, please do educate yourself, because that's my message to the world. That's what I'm trying to do here in my own small, tiny, and yes, I agree, insignificant little way. But I'm trying to tell people that you need to think, you need to research and base your opinions on facts, not on corporate media lies and propaganda. And as always, I close by saying, there are indeed only two types of people in this world. And as Bintang says, avoid them both. Have a good weekend, everyone.